with a diagnosis. I also felt as a single mom there were certain things that kept me separated from people. I also knew that for my peers who also shared a diagnosis, I was a very lucky person because I had custody of my children for most of their life, and so I wasn't able to connect with people in that sense either. And also just the fact that I wanted to spend time with my kids. So I'd be working and then trying to spend at least half an hour with each child each day, just listening to them and talking with them and doing things together, really left me very little energy for interacting with other people or just even time. I remember at a time there was a study that showed that a lot of parents spent less than 5 minutes a day with their children. And it was just, I didn't want that for my kids. I thought it was really important to build that relationship. As I sort of alluded to, there were 2 periods when my children were in foster care for 9 months each. The first was about a year after I was diagnosed, maybe 9 months after I was diagnosed. We've been staying at my mother's in very unsafe conditions, unhealthy conditions, and the CPS, or Child Protective Services worker, asked me would I please put my children into foster care because they would be in a healthier situation, they'd be better taken care of. And you know, I was very symptomatic at the time and agreed that the place we were living was not really good for them. And she also mentioned that if I voluntarily put them in, when I was ready, I could ask to have them returned. So I did agree. It was extremely difficult for everybody. I think at the time I really didn't understand the implications as much. Again, I was very new to the whole system of things and had a difficult time being able to visit with them initially, to the point where I did do a suicide attempt and called the foster mom and said, please let me see my kids at least one last time. Did go back in the hospital for that. Really worked very hard to get them back. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of points where I had to make a choice between living my own life and really making sure that I was focused on my children. I had gotten a full scholarship to go to a law school and had started taking classes at the law school, and when the CPS agency found out about it, said, hey, we're not a babysitting service. If you want your kids back, you better drop out and get them back now. So that was a very easy choice for me, and was able to do that. The second time when I had gotten very sick and there was really no safe place for them to go, and they had been in a good foster care family, I again asked for them to go back, but learned quite quickly that it was much harder to get them back a second time. Second time was really a sort of a heads up for them, and one of the very ironic things that I had to go through was I had to go to a children's or a mental health clinic that was going to observe our family interactions. And here I was, a woman, by then I was 40 years old, and had run children's program as a program director, had a master's degree, and there was a student who was doing her internship trying to evaluate whether I was a fit mother and could be responsible for my children. So again, it's sort of like swallowing your pride and really having to just do what CPS wants, which is such a difficult thing. A lot of times you just have to, when you want that goal of whatever you do for your children, there's times you really have to suppress some of what would normally be repulsive or reprehensible to you to really get what you want. So those are 2 points that really stick out in my mind of how I had to compromise my values in order to really make a choice to have my children. Of course, I felt a lot of guilt that they had gone into foster care, and that very often led me to try to be a little bit more giving than, or maybe less strict than I might have because I did feel so bad about that. Oh, I just did want to mention one more thing with the CPS. I actually was really, really lucky with CPS in many ways. Many of the workers were very supportive of me. I think I was very lucky because I am Caucasian and I have a college education, so they really afforded me a lot of the benefit of the doubt. And it was also during a time period when there was a lot more money and budgets. So they actually sent my kids to camp. My kids were in daycare for several years. Got a lot of services from CPS. I got rental assistance for 3 years. So, you know, there was sort of that trade-off of having them involved in my life, but also getting a lot of assistance and services. So I know, again, now in hindsight, I see how lucky I was in a lot of ways that I was able to take, had many benefits from that. 2 more quick points. Again, I guess this is as a single parent, that sort of tension between how focused you are on your children and what kind of relationship you might have with a potential partner. There were, of course, as an adult woman, I was interested in having an intimate relationship, and had a few people that I was involved with that were really not the best of partners, and there really was that tension back and forth between, well, this isn't working out, I need to focus on my kids. Mommy, why are you with this person? Do you love us anymore? You don't love us. What are you doing? And again, that time constraint. If you're working, if you're not feeling up to par, because again, I think a lot of you will relate to the fact that you may be doing well, but there's also times I need a lot of alone time, just trying to maintain my own health, and then having time for another adult partner as well is very difficult to balance. And lastly, something that I'm a little challenged by is sort of my kids' denial of my illness, I call it for want of a better word. They know I take actually a lot of medication, have since I was diagnosed. They know that I have a diagnosis, so they sort of have this sense of mommy having a mental illness or a psychiatric diagnosis. But at the same time, they really don't cut me any slack. You know, my son is very much, well, your behavior is a decision. How can you say that your illness leads you to do that? My daughter's, mommy, you know, you really do a lot of things like other people do. You know, you really just got to get up and do things. So I think my commitment to that, and also their lack of willingness to really allow me to be less than I could try to be, has really helped my recovery in a lot. So I think that gives sort of a synopsis of some of the main points that I've gotten out of my relationship with my kids. And I guess the main thing I just really want to emphasize is that they're just a very, very central point in my life. And even though I have some doubts about how things went, they've always been very reassuring. They know that they feel loved, which is something I never felt. They definitely know I have a commitment to them, and they're working as hard as they can also to do well, and are really being very successful in life. So it's been a core relationship for me. It's been a lot of love from both directions, and it's been an integral part of my being able to work on my recovery and doing productive things in my life.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks, Liz. While you were on, we were playing around with the sound a little bit. So I know I said I wasn't going to mute you, but I am going to mute you because it just sounds better when there's only one line open. So I'm going to mute myself as well.
No problem.
And we'll move over to Joseph Swinford. Second here. There we go. That should be a little better. So Joseph W. Swinford is currently the Deputy Director of the New York State Office of Mental Health's Office of Consumer Affairs. That is the office that I work in. He served previously as the Director of the Office of Consumer Affairs for the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities since 1995. In his role, he strives to ensure the perspective of consumers and families are incorporated into the state mental health systems. Prior to working in the mental health field, Mr. Swinford had a distinguished career as a teacher and minister. He began his work in community mental health as the founding director of Dakota Place Drop-In Center in Cleveland, Tennessee, prior to coming to TMHDD. Mr. Swinford is a contributing author to the Bridges Building Recovery in Individuals' Dreams and Goals Through Education and Support program. Mr. Swinford is recognized nationally as an expert in many areas of mental health administration, serving on numerous national boards and commissions, as well as a frequent presenter and writer for consumer and professional organizations on the topics of such as recovery, peer support, systems change, and managed behavioral health care. He is a past president of the National Association of Consumer Survivor Mental Health Administrators, which represents OCA directors throughout the country. He is also a member of the Board of Directors of Mental Health America, and based on his achievements in the field of mental health administration, he was selected to join the American College of Mental Health Administration. And I work with Joe every day in this office, and I can say that he is a fine man to work with. He has a lot of passion for what he does, and he gets a lot of things done, and has been very helpful for the people in the state of New York. So with that, I will open the mics up for Joseph Swinford. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Tony. Thanks for those kind words. I think the part you gave at the end means more to me than all the stuff that you mentioned earlier. When you're talking about relationships, really all of our relationships are what makes us a big part of who we are. And as I was listening to Liz speak, it was interesting because I looked up on my wall and I have framed on my wall a little poster that says in the preschool child glitter art type format that says, "Get well soon, Daddy. Love, Julie." Julie is my oldest daughter, and when I was first hospitalized, she was probably between 3 and 4 years old, and she made that poster for me when I was in the hospital, and I've always kept that on my wall to remind me of sort of what grounds me, and that's my relationship first off with my children and my family. Having a mental illness has been a real struggle with family relationships, and unfortunately, her mother and I had been married for about 10 years when I was hospitalized, and that relationship didn't really survive me beginning to address some of my own issues. And I think that a lot of us dysfunctional relationships or dysfunctional relating patterns come easy to us, if not are sort of at a core of what causes us issues in our life and related to our illnesses. I know in my own situation, I struggled with anxiety and depression most of my life, but I learned early on some very bad coping skills for relationships. So as I began to address those issues of anxiety and depression, then I was able to start learning some new skills for dealing with relationships and being open. And one of the things that I quickly realized is we all tend to have a habit of in any relationship starting out sort of projecting the best on the other person, and then somewhere along the way we move into sort of ignoring some of that. And I would say that that was a real struggle for me, particularly with my ex-wife, and trying to move forward and not just stay focused on the negative, but to really engage her and to start looking at how can we move past some of these negative things and really focus on what's positive for us. And unfortunately, she and I weren't able to work that out. But in my next relationship, I did start from the very beginning with that. Struggle I had, though, as a single dad, mid-30s or so, beginning to date again, was, how do I let this person know what they're dealing with. In my case, I was rather out in public as a person with a mental illness, so it didn't take a lot of Googling on the internet or anything for them to see that I had written a lot on the subject. I was pretty open about my illness, but I didn't start out the new relationship with saying, here's full disclosure, here's exactly who I am. I have these issues I deal with. I started it pretty much as you would any other healthy relationship you're trying to get started. I started with trying to both listen and make requests of her to listen to me. And as we moved along and we dialogued about it and talked about it, we were able to find some common ground, and it just sort of naturally flowed into opportunities to speak about kind of what I had been through and what led me into this line of work, and moving in even deeper into sort of what I was struggling with. I had another hospitalization after she and I got together, and she was very, very supportive. And I have to say that if it hadn't been for that kind of support, I'm not sure I would have made it through, because I was in pretty rough shape. And even though it was difficult for her, she was there and she was able to support me and to listen to me. And that's one of the things that I find is most helpful in a relationship, both for me and for her, but it's certainly something I absolutely have to have in relationships, is that ability to open up and sort of let down my guard and be who I am, particularly when we're in those alone times, and to share that, and to not be judged by it or about it, but to simply say, here's the thoughts that's going through my head. Maybe they're a little kooky, but it is what it is. And she's wonderful about listening to me, and she'll be honest if it's a little off the wall and tell me, but I return the favor to her as well, and so that's been really wonderful for me. The other part of relationships, though, that I wanted to speak just a second or two about was beyond the family, and learning how to have a good circle of friend relationships. And when I first was hospitalized, one of the things that I realized was that really most of my friends centered around work. And so I consciously began an effort to develop a circle of friends. I was never one of the guys who went to pal around with the guys and all go out drinking or anything like that. That wasn't my deal. It wasn't anything that interested me in. But I was able to develop a core group of guys that we all strove to support each other. It wasn't necessarily a support group or anything mental health oriented per se. It was just a companion group of us guys who had similar things we were dealing with as far as families, divorces, other things, and we were able to come together and just really bring support to each other about being a guy in the 90s, and in some cases, some of us were dealing with psychiatric issues, and so we were able to help each other in pulling that together. But to draw that support from my peers, if you will, was another set of relationships that for me really made all the difference. I mean, not to have that peer group that you can really have that close-knit friendship with was something I realized as I began moving down the road of recovery was something that was really missing, and I'm very, very grateful that I now have that in my life. So with that, Tony, I guess I will turn things back to you, and we'll pass it down the line.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. So our next person up is Digna Quinones, and Digna Quinones has been an advocate for individuals with psychiatric disabilities for over 12 years. She currently works for the New York State Office of Mental Health as a regional advocacy specialist in New York City. She has been with the Office of Mental Health since January of 2005 and has been involved in numerous projects and initiatives including PROS, housing, benefits counseling, adult homes, and self-help peer support groups. She and her husband Richard live a very active and engaged life with their extended families. Together they have 6 children and 8 grandchildren. And Digna is my counterpart down in New York City, and again, you know, she is a wonderful person. She's a wonderful person to work with. She's a wonderful person as a mother and grandmother. We have worked on some of these projects together, and I'm very lucky to have met her. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Digna. Are you there?
Hi, Tony. Thanks. Yeah, I'm here.
Yay.
Hi. Hi, everybody. And thanks, Tony, for those wonderful words. I'd like to begin by letting you guys know what's really important for me, the relationships. Well, it's my husband and my children and my grandchildren. In the 1990s, I made my first suicide attempt. When I went to the ER, the doctor asked me if I wanted some help, and I said yes. And that's that was my beginning in the mental health system and the beginning of my struggles. I worked really, really hard to move forward with my life. I worked in any job that my provider would give me. I finally was introduced to the peer community by my friends, and in that community I happened to be very lucky with the folks I surrounded myself with. They really supported me. Currently, I'm married for 9 years, and I really want to talk about my husband, who has really been my pillar of strength. He's actually the first male in my life that showed me any kind of respect and compassion, kindness that was really genuine. He was married prior to me, and I met his wife, and she was a wonderful person. We were friends before we got married. The care that he put into his first wife really showed me what type of person he was and how much he would be a support for me. And after she passed away is when we became friends. And we dated for like 6-7 months and lived together for like 2 years before we got married. His kids really welcomed me into the family, and they're wonderful. They are very supportive of both our illnesses. Richard is also diagnosed with mental health challenges, and we work on the relationship every single day. I get a reality check from him, and he also gets a reality check from me. And we also have wonderful friends we surround ourselves with also. They are also in our peer community. We have dinner together. We go to movies together. Sometimes me and my friends, we have the children over for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all different kind of holidays. My children, they, when I first was diagnosed, had to live with their grandparents, and I never gave up custody of my children to their grandparents. I am so lucky that I had these folks in my life to take care of my children for me, because if not, they would have gone through the foster care system. I was in that system and did not feel comfortable with putting them into that system. So today I have 3 of my adult children living with me, and also 2 of my grandchildren, which give me a sense of self to see these 2 little children grow and become people, you know. My children, some of them are, you know, because of me going through some challenges and being diagnosed, they didn't finish school. They're currently trying to get ahead, and that's all I have. I want to thank everybody. Okay. Thanks, Tony.
Okay,
Hello?
Digna. Yes, I'm here. I just
Okay.
distracted for a second. Thank you, Digna. Thank you very much. And people, you can send in your questions at any time. Again, if you have a question for a specific presenter, if you could just please put that in at the beginning of your note, so I'll be able to easily flag that for the person. And we have one more person, and then we're going to open it up for to the rest of the world here for interaction as best we can with this technology. So our next person is Lorraine Washington, and just before I introduce her, I want to just say one thing, and that is, you know, when we talk about if somebody falls off a roof or falls into a hole or falls off the ladder, these are not good things. And yet, when we say I'm falling in love, or I fell in love, you know, that kind of falling seems to be okay, even though you're still maybe out of control, and there may be some danger when you hit the ground. So our next panelist is going to have a little different perspective on things, and she's going to talk about some of the pitfalls and some of the things that some of the challenges and some of the dangers that are involved in being in unhealthy relationships. So I will want to introduce you to Lorraine Washington. She received a bachelor's degree at Canisius College and attended graduate school at SUNY Buffalo. Her work as an advocate began in 1980 as a housing case manager, where she advocated for equal opportunity in housing for the underserved and minority populations in Erie County, New York. She has worked in the field of mental health full-time in various positions since 2001. She is an experienced advocate, trainer, public speaker, facilitator, leadership educator, fundraiser, events coordinator, mentor, and establisher of self-help support groups. Lorraine has received numerous awards and certificates of recognition for her outstanding job performance, leadership role, efforts, and dedication in promoting employment and various other opportunities for individuals with disabilities. As an advocacy specialist and public employee at the New York State Office of Mental Health, one of Lorraine's primary objectives is making certain that users of mental health services and their families' interests and perspectives are represented in every aspect of the mental health service delivery system. I also want to thank Lorraine for taking on this particular challenging part of the presentation. And I also want to reiterate as well that she is a wonderful human being, and I have relied on her immensely for support, and she's a very kind and caring person. So thank you, Lorraine, for joining us. You there, Lorraine?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Tony, for those kind words. And thank you, everyone, for listening in today. My name is Lorraine Washington, as Tony said. I would just like to talk about relationships from standpoint is that I had to learn how to allow my true self to emerge in this journey of recovery and in my life. I was separated from my parents at a very early age. I was reared in a small rural town in Georgia, and I was reared by extended family members. I got into the mental health system sometime, I say indirectly, because my mother was a recipient of services back in the 50s. My mother used to drink and neglect me and my brother, and eventually she got into trouble with the law, and she had epileptic seizures. And in those days when you had epileptic seizures, they were sort of seen as a mental health issue. So they placed her in a state hospital in Georgia, and this place was a very intense place. During that time, there was segregation. Being a woman of color, she went through a very difficult time being in the system. And when my family members would take me to visit her, I would see the agony and the pain that she was in. She would talk about the ECT and the various medications and things that they had given her without her consent. And it basically tore our family apart. After seeing my mother in that situation, I think probably somewhere in my subconsciousness, I never ever wanted to see another human being go through with what my mother went through. But I never imagined that I would have to be in the system myself to help try to make changes and make this a better system. As I grew up, I was in a family that had very strict guidelines. They were very religious. Basically, I wasn't allowed to have what we call a normal adolescence. I didn't date. I had to wear clothing in a specific way. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup. I was just only allowed to basically go to church and go to school. And my legal guardian became one of my family members, and she was very abusive to me emotionally and physically. And during the last time that my mother was out of the hospital, around the age of 7, I had been sexually molested, and that changed my life totally. But I took the trade-off, I guess, of being with a family member that was physically abusive rather than to be in a place where that I was afraid that I was going to be sexually abused again. So I learned at an early age to basically tolerate people mistreating me. I learned at an early age to be very passive. I learned at a very early age to be this good girl and not to have a voice. I would just do what I was told to do and hope that the outcome would not lead to physical abuse. I grew up, finished high school, moved to Buffalo, New York with some relatives, and I didn't have the skills to basically, I would say, have a healthy relationship. The first relationship I was in, I had a child, my first son. The relationship didn't work out, and it was just me and my son for about 10 years. I thought I was, pretty happy, but when I met my first husband, he was a Vietnam veteran that had his own issues. He had addiction issues, and he became very abusive to me. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. We had a child, my second son, and during that time I was earning my undergraduate's degree, and the relationship was, I would say, like if you know what some people say living in hell, it was like living in hell. And during that time, my pent up anger, my pent up neglect, all of those feelings and emotions that I had not been allowed to express as a child started to manifest itself in panic and anxiety attacks. I had no idea what they were, but I knew there was a problem. I basically wanted to get out of the relationship because no one wants to be abused. And the more I tried to distance myself from the relationship, he would escalate the violence. My oldest son especially saw me go through a lot of things that I can identify with what Elizabeth was saying earlier. Your children see you go through things and they're wondering, is there, are you crazy? Is there a problem? Why you are in this relationship? So many people always ask women why they choose to stay. There's various reasons why women stay in relationships, or anyone as far as they're concerned. And I found out that I think in many ways I wanted, especially my youngest son, and soon after, followed that a daughter, to have this home that I never had. I think I was trying to recreate or create something that I never had, which was the love and the caring and the safety of a mom and dad being in the home. There were other reasons, of course. I stayed out of fear, but I basically knew that there had to be something better. And one of the things that I learned is that I had not learned to set healthy boundaries for myself. And setting healthy boundaries for yourself in any relationship is very important. And healthy boundaries are some of those things that basically teaches us how to have not just a relationship with other people, but with ourselves in that sense. And I hadn't really in some of those years discovered who I was, because I was always the people pleaser. I thought that if I said yes to everyone, then I would not feel rejected or I wouldn't feel different. But I learned later in life that it's okay to say no. It's okay for us not to let and allow people to get too close to us too soon. And this is a lesson that, you know, although sometime my life it seemed so out of control, I would constantly teach this to my children because I felt like being transparent was the best thing for me to do. During that turmoil in my first marriage, I thought I had learned, but I basically turned around and I remarried. And I remarried someone that was different in many ways from my first husband, but yet and still that person also had issues that they had never addressed. So I found myself, it seems like, back into the same situation again. But in this particular marriage, I didn't allow myself, to linger as long as I did in the first marriage. And I basically feel that it's okay to make mistakes. Even though you may be into recovery, it's okay, and you have to give yourself permission to be human. And during that time, I learned how to set boundaries, and one of the easiest things I learned to say was no. Although it's a very small word, it only consists of 2 letters, but sometimes you have to learn how to say no. I had to even learn how to say no to my children sometime because I felt like I was overcompensating all the time for their dad not being there. And today I can say that learning to say no was one of the best things that helped me, besides getting into a trauma group with women that shared some of the similar background that I had shared. There's a lot of negative things that happened to me in my relationships, and that is my recovery, is to stay out of unhealthy relationships. But also, as a mom, I felt like if I didn't do anything else right, I think I was a good mom. My children, my adult children, they are doing well. My youngest daughter, she finished the college. She finished and received her undergraduate degree from the College of St. Rose here in Albany. My younger son, he received his undergraduate degree at Colgate University. My oldest son, he went to the Navy and he worked on the railroad. Now he's an insurance salesman in Baltimore, Maryland. So those were some lessons that I think that, although they were difficult, I needed to learn to how to engage and have healthier relationships and make healthier decisions for myself. So thank you very much for listening. I don't want to go over time, Tony, because you know I can talk on and on.
Thanks, Lorraine. I like hearing you talk. I have made a mistake, so I just want to try and rectify that mistake. I was a little preoccupied in the beginning of the webinar as I was trying to do several things at once, and I was remiss in my initial introduction. The other folks that I introduced, I've worked with, pretty regularly for the last 5 years, and I had said some little anecdotal things about them, and I forgot to do that with Elizabeth. So I do want to say that, the first time I met Elizabeth was when we were doing our peer specialist ACT team listening forums down in Long Island, and right away she just came off as one of the sweetest, kindest persons that I've ever met. Just initially there was just like a very openness to her, and I just remember her smile very, very vividly. I remember the next time, because I think there's only been about 3 or 4 times that we've actually been together and worked together. I remember the next time she was going to be up here with meeting with my appers, and just very matter-of-factly, hey, do you want to come join us for dinner? And we're going to be hanging out, and just a very kind person. And I just want to make sure that I put that out there. That all of our panelists today are really great people that I really enjoy working with. And I'm sorry I was preoccupied in the beginning and forgot to mention that. So I wanted to put that out there for everybody. And again, I want to thank all our panelists. So let's open this up for some discussion. So in our when people were registering, one of the common themes that people asked had to do with trust issues. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because when in any relationship there's a risk involved around trust, and all of us have been burned, and maybe either purposefully or inadvertently burned other people. So there is an inherent risk in this, and as George Carlin says, a pet is a future tragedy. We all know that if we engage in a relationship with somebody, one of us is going to die first, and that is another risk, and that is another terrible thing that is going to happen. So the question is, is it worth it, and how long is it worth it for? As Lorraine was talking about some of these things. So I'm going to open it up and ask if any of our panelists want to talk about trust and developing trust. Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, Digna?
I like to say something about trust.
All righty.
In my current relationship, because we were friends prior to getting married, and his way that he approaches people really has put I really put my trust in him. He wants nothing from anyone, just friendship, and he really approached it by just not wanting anything from anybody, or anything from me. He was married, like I said before. My experience with men, like I said before, was really not a healthy one. Like Lorraine, I was in abusive relationships, and Richard was really the first male that I ever really trusted with who I am, and it's because he wanted nothing from me. I hope that was okay.
Yeah.
Good.
What about other folks? Any other ideas around? A lot of us do have anxiety. A lot of us have been isolated. We've lost our skills around speaking to other people. And we, as I said, we've been burned in the past. How do we? What are some tricks or some tips that people will use to sort of put your head back out there on the chopping block after it's been chopped off a couple times?
Well, Tony, this is Lorraine again.
Yeah.
I would just like to speak to that issue about trust. One of the things that I was talking about, is having healthy boundaries. And in relationships, we have so many different, types of boundaries. We have healthy boundaries, we have, collapsed boundaries, and we have rigid boundaries. And especially with a person like myself that was very trusting, living in a small town, and open, because I wanted people to care about me and I wanted that love. I basically let my guards down and trusted people that maybe I shouldn't have trusted so early. And when we are hurt by people, we have a tendency to develop, more rigid boundaries. And I think to learn how to develop trust, sometimes you have to really take that risk and let your guard down. Basically, we sometimes when we go through difficult things, whether it's you know disappointed by family, friends, or even ourselves sometimes, and try to live up to other people's expectations, and somehow the outcome is not the way we expected. Somehow we, sometimes build this fence up, and we shut everyone out. And I think the way that we can learn to trust is to learn to trust ourselves, number one, to listen to our own instincts, and basically to be open, to keep an open heart and an open mind. Although you may have been hurt, although you may have been going through a difficult time in your life, but not to basically become so rigid that you keep everything and everyone out. Because when you can't, when you keep everything out, you're keeping out the love and the compassion as well. So still having those healthy boundaries is a way to basically develop trust, and being genuine and being yourself. That's another way to develop trust in others as well.
Thanks, Lorraine. That was very, very good. I've got a specific question for Joseph. And the question is, person is saying, I find it more challenging to find some common ground in the professional spectrum than in the family one. My question is, how protected is a person with mental illness in the professional world if the illness was exposed? Was it difficult for you professionally dealing with the stigma amongst colleagues?
Well, that's an interesting question, since when I was first diagnosed, I was actually in a different profession as a minister, and to be honest with you, I found less, I wouldn't say my fellow ministers were cold, but I actually found more common ground with parishioners than I did with my fellow ministers. In some professions, I know it is dangerous, just to put it bluntly, to expose that you have an illness, because just of the professional view of that. I've been told by folks in one profession that is a healthcare profession, by the way, that if you expose yourself as having a mental illness, your career is pretty much over with. As a minister, I would say that my career was probably not over with, but I had trouble relating with other ministers, partly because you might not think it, but ministers are really very uncomfortable with dealing with people with mental illness because we get very little training in it. You would think that in seminary there'd be more training in that, but there's really not. And then there's also just the inherent stigma in the spiritual faith community itself about how to deal with mental illness. So it really depends on your profession. In the profession I'm in now, as a mental health administrator, I have dealt with some of that. It does cause some barriers with some people, but in general, it is who I am. It's a value added in the role that I have now, and so from that perspective, it has not been an issue, but certainly early on it was.
Thanks, Joe. I'm getting some questions here that has to do with, well, what can we do? and people are looking for some tools. So let's see. So one of the questions has to do with, let me just see if I can find it here, I'm sorry. So the issue of trauma as childhood abuse seems to be something that prevents individuals from developing healthy, intimate relationships. What kinds of peer support is available to deal with this? Are there any resources available for someone who wants to work on childhood trauma, such as therapy books, etc.? Does anyone have anything that they could share on that? Let me just open this up.
Mary Ellen Copeland has a book called Women in Trauma.
Okay, so Elizabeth, let me just mute the other folks here. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Just a real quick resource. Mary Ellen Copeland's book, Women in Abuse, or Women in Trauma, is peer-oriented, and it's set up as a workbook. So that's a nice tool.
So women, can you say it again, please?
Actually, here, this is what it's called. Wait a minute. Let me pull it off my shelf. Healing the Trauma and Abuse, a Woman's Workbook by Mary Ellen Copeland and Maxine Harris. And it's really set up as a workbook for peer work, and you can do it in a group or on your own. So that's just a resource for that.
Thank you. Yeah, Mary Ellen has. Most people know Mary Ellen Copeland through the RAP plan, and that was one of the questions in here around families.
Tony?
Yeah. Yeah, Joe.
Say one thing on the trauma. I can say one thing on the trauma. Often trauma is seen from there's a lot out there for women dealing with trauma, and even some people would say, well, trauma is a woman's issue, but I can tell you as someone who has dealt with it as a guy, it's even more problematic because just of the stigma of saying that you're a guy who's been through that makes it very difficult to let down your guard, to share that. That I think requires you to look a little bit deeper. But what helped me most was finding a group of guys that really was a support group for men in trauma, and I think those are not enough out there, and they're not well enough known, but they are out there, and so I would encourage guys who are dealing with it to certainly look for that, or certainly if you're interviewing a prospective therapist, ask point blank the question, what is your background in dealing with men who have faced childhood or other traumas? We often think about guys only experiencing trauma if they've been to war, but there's a lot of other traumatic experiences that men have had to deal with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. I did want to point out around, because there have been some questions from family members in regards to mental health problems, and there was a particular question, I'm going to paraphrase, that basically was around, well, if I have a mental illness, why should I don't want to, and I care for someone, I don't want to be in a relationship with someone that I care for, because a lifetime of mental illness, I don't want to put them through that hell. So part of what we're talking about today is that, we do know from the scientific research that's been out there, most notably the Courtney Harding study, is that most people do recover from mental illness. Most people do recover and go on to live, full lives. So if a relationship is bad, then you need to work on that. So that's a lot of relationships are bad that don't have anything to do with mental health problems or mental illness. But that I would put it that this is not something that is something that's going to be forever. This is not something that's going to continue forever, and that it takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of people to help us, but as somebody once said, you know, and one of the things that I found very helpful is that I have a reluctance to give up on myself, and that the people that I know who have been most successful in their recovery is they had a reluctance to give up on themselves. And what really helps is when you have other people around you who are also reluctant to give up on you. So these are the things. But one thing that could help is, I think, is a RAP plan. That could help both families and partners. So a RAP plan stands for Wellness Recovery Action Plan. Just very briefly, you know, it has to do with becoming mindful of, you know, what you're like when you're well, what you're like when you're not so well, what are some of the things that trigger you. A lot of this gets learned. You start to learn it through trial and error and, you know, observations, and you start writing it down. So it's an evolving process, but it's a good way to help develop some communication about what you want from other people and what you don't want from other people. I find it especially helpful, at least with me and my family, about what I like and what I don't like, and it has also helped me to modify my behavior so I don't get too snappy too quickly. So hopefully that's another resource for people to take a look at. Again, there's a lot of, you know, relapse prevention type things. There's a lot of plans like that, wellness self-management, but RAP is, you know, one of the more popular ones. Let's see. I'm getting older now, so I have to take my glasses off or on depending on how far away I am from something. So we're getting some other recommendations. Another resource is the Iowa Living Well plan. So these are all very similar. So if anybody wants to send that stuff in, we can certainly share that in our follow-up emails from the webinar. Let's see. I want to get this one. Okay, so I work, this is the person asking the question, I work in a supportive apartment program with 6 young adults with mental illness. None of them have even one true friend. How can my staff and I help them connect with people that could become friends? Or do we just continue instilling skills related to building inner wealth, healthy relationships, etc., to help equip them? So any thoughts on that from our panelists? We got 6 young adults with mental health problems, and none of them have friends, and they live in a housing program.
I don't think that's limited to people with psychiatric diagnosis. I think that's a very difficult age for a lot of people. And I think a lot of socialization seems to revolve around alcohol. So I think there may be some additional challenges, but I think just the not typical, but opportunities that are similar for other people their age. I've noticed that I just want to tie this in a little bit to 2 of the other comments, the comments on trust and whether I should expose someone to my trials and tribulations. What I've noticed for me is the quality of my relationship really depends on how I'm feeling about myself. And that can change at different points in a relationship. It changes throughout the day, actually. But so I would say that a couple of things is really having people be comfortable with who they are and believing that they deserve in a relationship. So that's some internal kind of work. But also, and this is a very big theme right now, is this whole idea of community integration. You're going to meet people that are doing things in the community and something you share, and that's the best way to build a relationship. Friendship even. Just people that share or enjoy doing things that you enjoy doing. It could be as simple as a reading discussion group at the library that maybe meets once a month. That's a way to start meeting people. Maybe joining a bowling league. The simple things that are activities that someone really enjoys, feeling good enough about yourself during that activity to reach out to someone. And then I think relationships really develop over time. So sometimes if we see something almost as a therapeutic goal, it's like, well, you've met someone 3 times, why aren't you a friend yet? So that's really not how relationships develop. So I think the more that we sort of normalize the challenges for people in that age group, as well as the whole idea of the quality of life that we'd like to see for people that's going to be more satisfying for people.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Let's see. So we've got a couple more questions here. Let's see. How does the experience of child abuse affect the ability to form relationships? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Well, Tony, I'll start. I
right.
hope some of the others will chime in as well. But based on not just my personal experience, but the experience that of peers of mine that I've talked with, it really does make it difficult to trust. I found it's really a long poem, but it was entitled For Children Who Are Broken. And I can't recall the author of it off the top of my head, but the point that's made is that for those of us who were harmed like that as children, trust is extremely difficult, because at the moment in our lives when we should be learning that the world is a welcoming and secure and nurturing place, that was yanked out from under us, and so we have to relearn that skill of nurturing, receiving, and nurturing ourselves to help us to begin to trust others again. But to me, it really does make all relationships very difficult when those very early relationships that should have helped ground us and given us the success to build later relationships turned out to be, well, for lack of a better word, poisonous.
And Joe, I totally agree with you. And one of the things that I learned to do, I had to basically practice positive affirmations. We talk about how trauma truly, it changes the brain. But we know that from study that you can basically rewrite those scripts and those negative things that have been embedded in you over a period of time by just positive self-talk. You have to tell yourself that you're worthy of good things. You have to really believe that you're worthy of good things. And once you start to believe some of these things, then I think you start to make better choices in your life, and basically being around people who are going to basically support you in the things that you need and you want in your life. We talk about, paying attention to those relationships that, uplift you, and you have to pay attention to the relationships that bring you down in that sense. So you have to basically, and I'm not saying it's going to be easy, it's difficult, but you are worth it when you have been traumatized as a child and you want to lead a healthier relationship. So therefore, you have to put that work in, and you have to constantly tell yourself that you're worthy of every good thing in life. So practicing positive affirmations is one of the ways that you can, kind of rewrite some of that negative script that's been going on in your head.
And it's Digna. You also, I believe, need to nurture yourself. That's, what's the missing piece is that if you nurture yourself and in whatever manner that you know how to, that's people who are traumatized in childhood, who get hurt like that, need a lot of nurturing, a lot of compassion, a kind hand. But most of us meet people who are, we get into relationships that are not so kind.
Tony, I'd like to add one last piece to that too that's really, I would hope more of a positive though to it, and that's that one of the first work groups I went to when I was starting to look at pastoral care was a fellow doing a work group called The Advantages of a Painful Childhood. and I went to it as a skeptic. So you got to be kidding me. I was new in recovery, and I was thinking, just now beginning to address some of these things and going, advantages? I can't see any advantages to what I've been through. But he pointed out that there is a spiritual dynamic to those things that we go through that may cause us harm early on, but they give a core of who we are that gives us a place to help others from. And he pointed to a saying that the Buddhists have, that suffering is. And his point was that in the vast scheme of life, there will be suffering. It simply is a part of the ebb and flow of nature. And yes, it is horrible that some people suffer like that as children, and it does cause impairments. But I've also found that it does also give a little bit of a gift. It gives you the insight to help understand a potential partner in a relationship and understand where they're coming from, and in some ways can help you have a little bit deeper relationship with someone.
Thank you, Joe. So we're gonna wrap up now. There's 2 points that are in our questions that I did want to touch on. There is a person who's taking umbrage with the idea of recovery, and I do want to point out and clarify that when I say recovery, I don't mean cure. Recovery is not a cure. Recovery is we learn how to live active, full lives in spite of our mental illness or with our mental illness, and we learn how to, the symptoms are still there. They may or may not be helped with medications, and we learn how to adapt. And just like anybody else with any other kind of illness, we learn how to adapt. We can wear long sleeve shirts to hide the scars from our cutting, or it's just one sort of example. We can hide our hands underneath the table. We can have support networks. It takes more energy and work to be well and to work through the activities of daily life. But it is doable. It's backed up by really good science. There's been multiple studies. Again, I will refer people to the Courtney Harding study. That is the biggest one, but consistently worldwide, there's been 9 major studies, longitudinal studies over many, many years, and these were not. They did not pick the low-hanging fruit. They picked the people from the back wards who were allegedly the sickest. So, so I did want to just put that out there, that is real, and that people do recover, and that you have 5 people here who I think that would consider themselves recovered or in recovery. Some people look at it as an end, some people look at it as a journey, but it is out there, and it is possible for people's lives to get better. Another person mentioned that they are doing all the things that they're being told to do, going out to yoga classes and to church, and just not able to connect. I don't know. I can certainly relate to that. I did the things that I was told I was supposed to do, and that would lead me to something. But things happen for a reason or don't happen for a reason. I don't know what to tell you. What I can say is that one way that I have found to be very engaged with people is to not talk about myself, and to, I think Earl Nightingale said that he holds a marble in his hand, and the marble is to always hold that marble towards the other person, to remind him to ask about the other person and to let the other person talk. And you'll have a lot of people who want to talk to you if you let them speak about themselves, versus going on about your own life. And a lot of us in mental health have been trained. We've been trained to speak our stories. Today we had four people telling their stories. We've been trained to talk about ourselves. We can become very self-absorbed. Not that I'm saying anyone here was, because that was the purpose of the webinar. But as mental health consumers, we can really get self-absorbed, and it's really important to listen to other people and become other people oriented. Another thing I want to put out there is there's a website called meetup.com, www.meetup.com, meetup.com, and there are that's like a social site that has different groups, or you can start your own group in your area around anything. There are a lot of Wiccans in New York State apparently, and I didn't know what Wiccans were, but there's a lot of Wiccan groups. There's a lot of pagan groups down in the Poughkeepsie area, I think. But it can be around spirituality or knitting or doll making or philology, whatever it is that you have a particular interest in. And that's really one of the biggest things that I have found helpful, and that we promote a lot here at the Office of Consumer Affairs, is that for me, I was able to hide my quirks and my illness in art, and that I played in a band, and people were willing to forgive my eccentricities. They did not see them as mental health symptoms, but they saw them more as eccentricities because I was an artist. So I was able to get away with a lot of things because we were connected together to be part of a bigger project. That was the band. So if people can connect around something that they're very passionate about, a lot of times the group will forgive you whatever eccentricities that you have. So I want to thank all of you for coming today. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their stories. It does take a lot of courage to make yourself sort of vulnerable like that. They were very compelling. I wish I got to pay as much attention to them, but I'm going to go back and listen to the archive so I can hear everybody's story again. I'm fascinated by it. The folks are really good role models. They're good. It's a good testament to what's possible. I hope people do get out there and do get connected to other folks, not necessarily intimately, but whatever happens, happens. As they say, the fates carry those who are willing, and those who aren't, they drag. So let's jump into all of this, and hopefully people will be connected. That's really what we're looking for. Our next webinar will be on art and recovery. So it'll be very similar to the one today, and we did get some suggestions around video, and we might be able to do some video. I'm not sure. It's going to depend on the bandwidth, so I'm not sure how that's going to work. But our next webinar will be May 18th on art and recovery. We'll have some folks and talk about how powerful art has been in helping them express themselves and bridge the gap between describing the internal landscape that cannot be really clothed with words in a lot of cases. But we use metaphor, we use art and other tools to describe that to people, and again, communicate and stay connected. So again, I want to thank everyone for coming today. There will be a short survey at the end. If you could please just put your comments in there, I'd really appreciate that. We do take them quite seriously, and I look forward to that. And thank you for coming, everyone, today. And let me unlock the folks, and we'll just say bye, bye Digna, bye Elizabeth, bye Joseph, and bye Lorraine. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Muted.